Hi there, Ori'Ana. How are
Hello,
you?
Dr. Ho. Hello, good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you for coming back for our second show of your series. So today we have some very interesting topics picked up by Ori'Ana, and it's something like on third eye and rainbow body and some Yakui traditions. So Ori'Ana, let's start.
Okay, I wanted to give a few little words on topics that are more and more well known because the Tibetan tradition makes a very great difference between what is well known as rainbow body, third eye, and what is commonly said. In fact, the third eye is not the pineal gland, the rainbow body is something very specific, and I wanted to talk just to give you a little insight in the ancient tradition of the ancient guys of 2,000, 3,000 years ago, just giving a brief definition, and also giving you excerpts of one of the most sacred texts in the tradition, an author called Longchenpa, which means infinite expanse, from early 14th century in Tibet, but he's also a project of Padmasambhava, who himself was the direct incarnation of Shakyamuni and also of the tradition of Garabdoje, which was many centuries before, the tradition of Dzogchen, meaning great perfection, which refers to the great completion of the energy that is self-contained in a toroid field, the torsion field physics. So I'm just going to give you a few excerpts and let you decide for yourself, let it talk to you or not. If it doesn't talk to you, just leave it where it is, it won't harm. But for those who are interested, it might give you a taste. These books are found on internet. The name is The Precious Treasury of the Way of Abiding by Longchen Rabjam, Padma Publishing. You can find it online. It was published in 1998, and the cover nowadays looks like this. It's just a new edition that will have this kind of visual. And this is really the most secret of secrets. It was translated at the time by a Tibetan teacher who really wanted to make a proper translation, because these topics were becoming translated more and more, and there's of course very crappy translations, and the subject is deep and needs to be seen with precision and certainty, rigor. So it's one of the best translations of the type that ever exists. I would highly recommend it. And if you want to have a taste of what is rainbow body meditation, you will have a little idea with these. Then the third eye, and then a little, very short excerpt from the tradition of Central America known as the Yaqui tradition, best known through Castaneda, Carlos Castaneda, just to give a taste of what is the path of a wisdom warrior, because it just talks and it seems beautiful. And at the end I wanted to punctuate with just a few notions on meditation, if we still have the time, because the subject needs to be talked about in depth before even starting. It's a technique, and we need to know what we're doing, why, who, what for. And just to quote the Testament of Milarepa, which just takes one page. So I'll start off with the topic of rainbow body. It is technically a complete decrystallization of physical matter. It is a fusion process, a zero-point fusion process. It is accomplished through self-awareness, fully knowing itself. As a consequence, the body responds harmonically to a zero-point frequency, and then you can pass through walls and stargate yourself to any point in space-time, because it's a decrystallization through awareness, better known for us right now as consciousness, which has its own zero point. So it's the fusion to the core of this torsion field. So it is not the form body that is talked about in other topics in the disclosure community. Other well-known speakers will talk about the body that's made of light. The light body, here in the infinity map, which I talked about in more detail with Pierre Sabac, the universe has 3 layers. It's like an apple with onions. The third most dense is where we are. The less dense layer, but which is really super higher dimensions, is called the form body, because they're all bodies of light, but it is still within the mechanism of psychical existence, because it's a conditioned state of existence. You're not free from the core of your own perception, you're not back in your zero point. So therefore, this state will last a certain duration of time, which will be longer compared to now, but it won't last. It's not the full freedom at all. And then even beyond that, there is the realm of those who don't even have a body. Your awareness, your consciousness, doesn't even need to have physical body to be. And these aren't really talked about very much, because obviously how would you encounter them if you don't even have bodies? So secret space program people most often won't even relate to those yet. But they're talked about in the ancient text. They're a category of beings who the energy is so subtle, but it's not completely decrystallized. Anyway, let me get to the point. Let the words of the wise guys of old talk, and I hope you might find it interesting. The first one is a text composed by Gerard Dodge, the founder himself, 3,000 years ago, of the Dzogchen lineage, called The Natural Freedom That Underlies Characteristics. The fact that the nature of phenomena is freedom in non-duality is perfectly plausible, but it is not conceivable in lower approaches. The ease with which a wild goat kid climbs a rock face is possible for it, but is not feasible for other creatures. Freedom within the expanse of awareness, in which nothing need be done, is impossible with inferior spiritual approaches involving effort and achievement, but it is easy for one immersed in genuine being, yogi, on the path, equal to space, on which nothing need be done. Timelessly awakened, awareness is non-referential. It cannot possibly wander in samsara, yet is the innate condition of all possible conditioned states. The inferior mind, which believes the perceiver to be real, is freed in space, freed within the expanse that has no basis. The unique sphere, without edges or corners, cannot possibly manifest dualistically, yet is the innate condition of all possible conditioned states. The confused mind, which reifies phenomena as being identical or different, is freed in oneness, freed within the expanse of the nature of phenomena. Anything can and does arise, freed within the indeterminate expanse. Visual forms manifest, apparent phenomena that are naturally free. Sounds are audible, heard, yet free in their own ground. Whatever forms are seen or sounds are heard, regardless of what arises to the five senses, there is no object, no other, for this is your true face, beholding itself. For anyone who does not hold onto traces from the past or anticipate the future, but lets consciousness rest moment by moment in its own place, all consciousness blends as one, without any distinction into earlier or later, in what is called the single unifying essence. This is to immerse oneself in genuine being, knowing the equalness of the three times. Through the skillful means of allowing focused attention to resolve naturally, samsara and nirvana blend in non-duality. To bring an end to recollection of the past, curb anticipation of the future, and allow consideration of the present to fade naturally, is what is called immersing oneself in genuine being by knowing the equalness of the three times. Fundamentally, dynamic energy arises ceaselessly from spontaneous presence, so that what manifests in the moment as the confusion of samsara arises through the avenues of the senses as the complex universe of dualistic perceptions. One comes to a decision about this through view, maintains the continuity of this view through meditation, dispels constraints through conduct, and as the fruition abandons hope and fear. Thus, when one immersed in genuine being becomes free of the confines of the physical body, dualistic perceptions that manifest as confusion dissipate in and of themselves. When lights of 5 colours shine without obstruction from a crystal, these lights are perceived as distinct colours, yet none is better or worse. They are the dynamic energy of a single crystal sphere. Self-knowing awareness, the ground of being, is similar to that crystal sphere. Its emptiness, is the nature of dark energy. Its naturally radiant lucidity is its own movement, and its unceasing avenue as the ground for arising of sensory field perceptions is physical matter. From the consummate and ultimate perspective of the definitive heart essence, chains of gold and ropes are equally binding. Likewise, the spiritual and non-spiritual bind the mind equally, just as light and dark clouds are equally obstructing, positive and negative actions equally obscure awareness. Therefore, it is crucial that one immersed in genuine being, who has realized this to be so, transcend all causes and effects, whether positive or negative. Because this, you see, is the topic of non-causality, which is the heart of the toroid field, when causality, karma, is the mechanism when dualistic consciousness cannot relate to its own source, its source energy. So the language is different, but this does not deny karma. It's one toroid, but this is the language which is usually not spoken publicly. And then from one of the, in fact, the major tantra or continuum of the most external category of Dzogpa Chenpo, Dzogchen, which still has a little bit of dualistic conceptual minds, called the mind class. Then there's a little bit less non-dual, called the space class. Then there's the non-dual class, which is the topic of Longchenpa and the Dzogchen tradition in its core. But the first tantra that you would study in university over there is called the all-creating monarch. It's a metaphor for our awakened mind, for our source spirit, or Christ consciousness, as some might call it. So, the text is talking to you in its own terms. Oh, great and courageous one, if you want to accomplish natural mind, you can only do it by not wanting to. So do not try to dwell in non-conceptual evenness. Abide naturally in the mode that has nothing to do with acceptance or rejection. Abide as a matter of course in the state that does not waver. Mind is the essence of being, just as it is. And one text by Sri Singha, who was the first Chinese master of the lineage. Garab Dorje, his first student, was an Indian master. Garab Dorje was from the area of Pakistan. His main student was from India, and his main student was in ancient China. And then the whole lineage of this tradition also has been living in China since the time, but it is less well known because, as you know, the circumstances in China are not optimal to make it known even to your family, the fact that you practice these things. It's even more secret than Falun Gong. Anyway, one of his texts, called the Great Garuda, states, "Abandon desire for bliss, for this harms the mind. Rely on resting naturally, free of anything needing to be done regarding samsara or nirvana. As for the magical display of mind and apparent phenomena, this is self, this is other. The hindrances of mental stirring, perceiving, thinking, and fixating are dispelled, and so there is imperturbable rest that defies all attempts at verbal expression. The implications of whatever manifests as the miraculous display of ordinary conceptual mind can be discerned within the so-called interval, free of characterization, between conceptual mind and the objects that constitute its function." So here you see that we're getting into the science of our perception seen from inside, just like quantum physics sees the smallest particles of matter and energy outside. Here it is quantum meditation and quantum physics very much, because you see the smallest pockets of perception with the tool of your awareness and your intuition directly, on smallest levels. And this is where you can discern these intervals.
I have a simple question here, Ori'Ana. So, you were talking all of these masters who were talking about the rainbow body, right? So, is attainment of the rainbow body important in the context of what everybody knows as ascension?
It is important in the sense that it goes towards getting something more free and better, but it is totally opposite in the sense that the usual version will still be in the mechanism of samsara, will only last a little while, just like a nice weather, and then the storms will come back again because of the mechanism of the toroid. Here, the rainbow body is in the core, in the 0 point, and this breaks the cycle of existence completely, whereas the others are still kept within the laws of karma and the rest. That's the main definition.
Thank you.
So I'll continue with the Great Garuda again, by the Chinese master Sri Simha, which means the glorious lion, or radiant lion, the meaning of his name. "For anyone who posits a non-existent ground, a goal-oriented path, and an end result, liberation remains obscure precisely because of these suppositions. Emptiness, or empty full potential, as dull or illuminating, as existent or non-existent, as something to be affirmed or denied, as cause or effect. There are no such limitations as these 4 pairs of 8 factors. This is analogous to the realm of space. Any positing of limiting alternatives to strive for is similar to a blind bird's search for the end of the sky. Nothing will be found. No one could possibly distort the ultimate meaning that nothing can be found. It is impossible for this unelaborate object of knowledge to have a final limit. The style of Sri Singha is slightly different from Garab Dorje, and Garab Dorje really focuses things differently, but it's also, he's very sharp, and he was a great monumental teacher in his own right, just as much as Shakyamuni and anyone else. So almost at the end, 83. So a text again by Garab Dorje, the founder, called, sorry, I'll close the window, the rain is disturbing the sound. So this text called The Direct Encounter with the Holy Trinity, or the 3 bodies. It's called the 3 embodiments, in Sanskrit, Trikaya. The 6 kinds of beings and the 4 modes of rebirth originate from the basic space of phenomena and return to that space. Although objects and mind appear distinct from one another within dualistic perception, it is the basic space of phenomena that is perceived as object, basic space that is perceived as subject. There is no dualistic perception within the realm of basic space itself. The extent of what is known by Buddhas or enlightened ones of the 3 times arises from the basic space of phenomena and is known therein. Knowing is unceasing, and the known is the basic space of phenomena. The direct encounter with the 3 bodies is the expanse within which there is natural arising and natural freedom. And now more precisely, technically, to define the rainbow body itself. Because the practice of Dzogchen is divided into 2 main categories, based on original or primordial purity, the fact that our awareness at its core is never corrupted or stained, it is totally pure, originally pure, is one way of practice to achieve rainbow body, the real thing in the 0 point. And the other path is the path of spontaneous presence. You work on the clarity, the light effects with dark rooms and so forth. So the 2 different practices, but they achieve the same goal. And here Longchenpa is simply giving a little discussion to people, his peers in his time, because even in his time people weren't being clear enough. It's a very difficult topic. So he was commenting, there are 2 approaches. When the meaning of original purity is brought to its ultimate conclusion, in the approach known as cutting through solidity, or trekshu, the elements fall away. When spontaneous presence is brought to its ultimate conclusion, in the approach known as making the quantum leap, or tugel, the elements are purified. These 2 are alike only in that external and internal matter is purified, but there is no distinction of whether or not the so-called body of light is attained. In the approach of cutting through solidity, the smallest of the body's particles disperse, and freedom instantly comes about in original purity, so that the body of light does not manifest. In the approach of making the quantum leap, tugel, the body of light is, quite simply, the factor that brings about the accomplishment of supreme transference, which is another term for the full 0 point target, full accomplishment, where you don't have anything left to do. There is no distinction, however, regarding the way in which freedom comes about on the level of original purity. Through such a majestic spiritual approach, one is capable of overwhelming everything with the splendor of one's realization and coming to a decisive experience of causality in this life. In realizing the matrix that is the nature of phenomena without its being impaired, one immersed in genuine being gains an authentic degree of indwelling confidence and so conquers the confusion of causality. Lesser spiritual approaches are not relied upon, and theories of causality are not posited. This is because the outermost confines of one's view have been thoroughly shattered, and everything is understood to be naturally occurring, timeless awareness. So this talks about the distinction people who know the tradition might make, because some, when they achieve rainbow body, nothing is left. Some, the body shrinks, and some hair and nails are left. This is precisely the differences that occur through these practices that Longchenpa was commenting upon, on how you do this. In some cases, the nails and hair which are already dead cells, so it's harder to decrystallize because they're already dead, and so forth. So this is the real original rainbow body in the sense from the Himalayan tradition. Then I wanted to talk about the third eye, because this is really like learning biology in school. You just really need to at least know the basics, to know people who are charlatans unbeknownst to themselves, because this information is not well known. So just to give an explanation, the third eye, what is it? The explanation given here is an understanding we can transpose to every other part of our body, the brain, and so forth. Let's start with the beginning. Before the beginning of time, there is primordial, timeless awareness, which has, as I remind you last time, the four qualities of the primordial tetrahedron, right? Space, sound, which is light, energy, which is love, and aware. These are the four fundamental properties. So, this awareness, in Sanskrit vidyā, in Tibetan rigpa, is non-conceptual, as opposed to consciousness that can only know things through comparing this with that, with the effortsome use of concepts. This is the primary condition or cause. If this timelessly wholesome awareness does not self-acknowledge its own self-nature, it confuses itself and starts perceiving its own content as being other, separate from itself. Then the illusion-like notion of a me, altogether coined ego-grasping or ego, starts to develop and further complexifies itself, getting trapped in its own patterns of how it relates to its own so-called objects, with the fundamental wisdom energies of awareness being experienced as conflicting emotions, and the five are stupidity or ignorance, it's an emotion, desire or attachment, anger or hatred, jealousy, envy, covetousness, and pride or haughtiness. They're the main tunes with the five colours of the rainbow. Dualistically, they are experienced as conflicting. When you are fully aware in your 0 point, they are just wisdom that powers you up in a totally free way. For those who want a little insight into crazy wisdom, or is it wisdom gone crazy, or craziness gone wise, there's a little movie on the life of Chogyam Trungpa, who had pioneered Buddhist centers in the USA in the late 70s, and it's free online on archive.org, and it just gives a taste, and you have a direct little film that gives you a colourful insight. This is coined by the tradition as karma, mind action, and klesha, conflicting emotions. What is known commonly as karma is the entire mechanism of this, which initiates as a mind wind, prana, chi, mind movement, also known as a thought, which then develops as our individual fields of personal sensory experience, the input of the 5 and 6 senses. 5 outside, 1 inside, the 6th sense is thinking. These tendencies or habits of ways of thinking, ways of being, of reacting, further crystallize and tense up. So ego is a cramp of the source mind energy, nothing more. So the soul is a mental body. It is our ego coming from ignorance of our own self-nature. It's just a natural mechanism that so happens to govern the cosmos. It's the first result of this primordial ignorance. So our soul already is a result, and primordial ignorance is its cause. And this is important to understand when we hear among secret space program experiencers, some talk about the fact that some greys eat human souls and feed off the energy of our souls. So the legitimate question, if your soul gets gobbled up for breakfast by greys, what happens to you in your process of evolution? This is can only be understood with this kind of understanding, otherwise people would kind of freak out. Nothing is lost because it's a tendency the soul will flip back up, just like the timelines also flip back elastically in time, just like Corey Good was describing. It's the quality of the whole oneness of the thing. But it's very serious issues that need to be addressed. So step 2, the soul further augments itself by associating with a physical body, which is complex to highly complex geometric structure made of aware elements that have the same problem too. They are not self-aware, although awareness itself remains their very nature, also as of everything else. But their awareness is latent, not self-aware. It's potential, possible. So the body also is the second result of this same fundamental ignorance or absence of self-recognition, of self-awareness by itself. Sorry for the redundancy, but it's precisely to get the idea. Whence the term ignorance. It's not a thing. It's like darkness is light not manifest, but there is no darkness if light could not potentially be there. So ignorance is just awareness not fully powered up with the kiss of true love, as in the fairy tales of quantum physics. The cause is both having this primordial ignorance and the habitual tendencies that further harden their imprints therefrom. There you understand how you get rainbow body at all. It's something to do with your consciousness that stops cramping. Simply it's energy that has to let itself relax and decrystallize. Conclusion: what is your brain? What is your pineal gland? It's an organ, meaning a physically crystallized structure, or machine or body, that responds to the impulses of your soul, itself responding to this fundamental ignorance of the ground of being. So, nota, all our past experiences, whatever we've been through in this mode of consciousness, have left many imprints as latent tendencies in what is called the ground consciousness, in Sanskrit alaya vijnana, dualistic unconscious or ground of all consciousness, which includes the infamous Akashic records and many other levels, the group Earth planetary consciousness and the national consciousness and all that. But this is merely or only the second possibility of awareness in its potential. This is non-dual awareness. This is self-aware by nature. But that does not recognize itself. Because of this, it tenses up like a cramp upon itself into dualistic consciousness, which is what we are familiar with. All our thoughts, experiences and sufferings are recorded in this structured, tense patterning that conditions our mind, whence our thoughts and experiences of life, like on an internal hard disk drive. So in other words, when your awareness decrystallizes through meditative practice or other direct personal intuitive insights, this activates your pineal gland, not the other way round. The pineal gland is a natural organ, generally speaking, but remember that this entire human project down here is bioengineered by a certain number of ETs, genetic farmers, see Corey Good's explanations. So as we know, many ETs intervened, different groups at different points in time and for various agendas and purposes, and meddled with the size of our pineal glands in order to attempt to control and manipulate us better still. The key word here being to attempt, because ultimately if your awareness gets free, self-empowered from inside, you can just have the gesture with the middle finger upright to anything else. Freedom cannot be prevented from when it's achieved to the core. And others can attempt to manipulate you, just like when someone is tickling you, trying to play with you. You will perceive it, but you won't be destabilized. Because as a matter of course, this does not and can never work on self-aware individuals. So it can only influence the so-called sheep-like at best, and for those who have self-awareness, this one being the non-conceptual nature, and nature of everything regardless, those individuals couldn't care less about the size of their pineal gland. Because this awareness is the direct quantum access to everything, directly and by itself, it forever does not rely on your bodily parts, or for that matter, on their absence altogether. Remember who is the cause of who, and who is a resultant aspect of our mind-speech-body complex. To paraphrase Law of One in a more correct terms, since spirit refers to the speech aspect and not to some kind of mentality. People misunderstand this term because they don't know the tradition, what they are referring to. So how do we know this for a fact? Remember the example David Wilcock gave about a man who had hydroencephaly. You know, there was water in the brain, and the brain was like a pea size. And the man he was quoting had a lot of water, so inside his cranium cavity, and there was physically only a very small lump of brain actually present inside his head. And that guy passed a quite high certificate or degree with excellent marks on top of that, he was explaining. So how could that logically be possible if the brain is the size of a pea and the guy can have such an intelligence and IQ? It's obviously because the brain is responding when it's there to something else, which is there regardless. And this is in the soul, and even more so in the awareness, which is not destructible. It is the undestructible nature represented as the swastika, you know. These four fundamental properties of the primordial tetrahedron. So a degree that most of us with a whole brain would not even be able to pass. So that's one example. How on earth is this even possible at all, if, as mainstream scientists affirm, the brain were really the cause of our thoughts or emotions or perceptions or whatnots? It is but an intermediary from the mind itself, from the awareness. So, the pineal gland, likewise. But indeed, if our pineal glands were bigger, we would naturally have far easier access to all our naturally, potentially there, psi abilities, as the West calls them. But these abilities, in their entirety and power, are all fundamental qualities and powers of this singular awareness that we have all the time, and that is already complete and perfect. Non-dual, non-conceptual awareness, in our own core of our perception. So then, if someone realizes this non-dual awareness inside of himself, one might ask, what are the repercussions on the physical body, and in particular on the brain and on the pineal gland? Ready? 1. The body, it dissolves into light, rainbow body. 2. The brain, it's a quantum computer. Direct access to everything in the entire cosmos, superposition and entanglement are its natural features. No dualistic, exhausting thought processes where your neurons have to do so many things and more. You can care less about your IQ. You have direct, all-encompassing wisdom, whether you can explain theories of quantum physics and complicated cooking recipes or not. The pineal gland, it activates all it can, like a Christmas tree in a disco. So indeed, if you have a big one, it's kind of better, but it is not the central concern. It remains forever a detail and a resultant one, not a cause. In regards to self-knowing awareness, self-acknowledging itself by itself, which is the practice of meditation. Another living example of what fully valid evidence we have of this, accessible to everyone down to the last peasant or farmer, is this. If you ask a person who has the handicap of being born blind, if they dream at night, which of course they will unless they are simply not aware of it themselves, which is also common, but technically everyone dreams. And when you ask them if they dream things in black and white, or rather of houses, trees, with colours or not, you'll be shocked to discover that they dream of all sorts of things just like anyone else. So, question, yet how could your brain feed your dream field with an experience you've never had, if the brain were the cause of the emotions and not the other way round? If you don't even know, for having never seen one, what a tree or house looks like to the eye, in the case of a blind person. So these are practical examples that you use that show how mainstream academia is missing something very important. This proves valid evidence that the brain, or any other organ for that matter, is a result and not a cause of our own individual field of perception. In this case, past life experiences of vision, when you had a valid body with eyes, in this case. So that was for the third eye. I'll quickly hop into, this one will be much shorter. The path of a wisdom warrior. What is a warrior of wisdom? In short words. A man of knowledge is a warrior. The existence of a man of knowledge is an unceasing struggle, and the idea that he is a warrior, leading a warrior's life, provides one with a means for achieving emotional stability. The idea of a man at war encompasses 4 concepts. 1. A man of knowledge has to have respect. 2. He has to have fear. 3. He has to be wide awake. 4. He has to be self-confident. Hence, to be a warrior is a form of self-discipline which emphasizes individual accomplishment, yet it is a stand in which personal interests are reduced to a minimum, as in most instances personal interest is incompatible with the rigor needed to perform any predetermined obligatory act. A man of knowledge in his role of warrior is obligated to have an attitude of deferential regard for the items with which he deals. He has to imbue everything related to his knowledge with profound respect in order to place everything in a meaningful perspective. Having respect is equivalent to having assessed one's insignificant resources when facing the unknown. If one remains in that frame of thought, the idea of respect is logically extended to include oneself, for one is as unknown as the unknown itself. As a warrior, a man of knowledge also needs to be wide awake. A man at war has to be on the alert in order to be cognizant of most of the factors pertinent to the 2 mandatory aspects of awareness. 1. Awareness of intent, and 2. Awareness of the expected flux. The last aspect of the idea of a warrior's behavior is the need for self-confidence, that is, the assurance that the specific purpose of an act one may have chosen to perform is the only plausible alternative for one's own specific reasons for acting. Without self-confidence, one would be incapable of fulfilling one of the most important aspects of the teachings, the capacity to claim knowledge as power.
Well, so much has been said, but I think from all those reading, I get that the important part is to you mentioned a lot about, or they mentioned a lot about being awareness, and also aspects of meditation. Is that right, Ori'Ana? Wow, that's the main gist of the message. Is that correct?
Yes, this is just not so much a message as simply an invitation to see how these topics talk to you. Because now with people becoming more and more awake, you know, with the higher cloud of energy, there's more and more people who simply are ready to hear in simple, sincere words what these topics were about. And then we can rediscover them, revisit them with a fresh look. They're not old books covered with spider cobwebs and dust. They are actually more relevant to our present than what we could ever have, in a way. So it's an invitation for those who would like to go and see further, just to give little tastes. Would I give you the Testament of Milarepa? Would you like that?
Oh, yes, please, Milarepa, my favorite.
So Milarepa had two foremost students. One is called the sun-like disciple and the other the moon-like disciple. It's just in terms of their radiance, because one had many students of his own and became very famous and his lineage really expanded. The other was not well known and the lineage didn't last long, so it's just in terms of their radiance. So to his sun-like disciple, the one who was really going to radiate a lot, that Milarepa had foreseen he was going to have a great future, he gave the quintessence of all his testaments. This did not require a single word. As you know, Milarepa was a meditation practitioner, and he was practicing in Tibet in rocks, in high areas. He was basically an antisocial of the finest category. And he was just sitting on rocks in desolate places all his life in very simple clothes, just practicing. It was really the heart of what he had intended to do. So his testament to his beloved sun-like disciple, he stood up, he turned around, he lifted his robe, and he showed him the moon, so to speak, his backside. As you know, when you walk barefooted on the land, on the earth, people who walk like that all their life, the skin is this thick on the soles of the feet. So, of course, Milarepa had a skin this thick on his backside, which is the content of his testament, the meaning of which was, "Practice makes perfect, my son." So Milarepa was all about rolling up your sleeves. It's a tough situation, we're in trouble, samsara, the mechanism, is very, very hard to break, but if you really want to be free that bad, it is possible, and he was an example of giving it full throttle to accomplishing that. Then to his moon-like disciple, who was lesser known, he gave the same thing, but in 6 verses, 6 paragraphs. So it's called Milarepa's Song of the 6 Essential Key Points, his final words. My son, who are like my very heart, listen to this song of instructions and final will. In the ocean of transmigration of the 3 realms, the conglomerate that is this illusory body is the great sinner. Worrying about gathering food and clothing, one never has time to cast aside worldly busyness. Do away with worldly preoccupations, Richungpa. In the city of one's illusion-like body, one's own mind, devoid of any substance, is the great sinner. Concerned with solicitations of one's flesh and blood body, one never has time to realize the meaning of ultimate reality. Determine the nature of your mind, Ori'Ana. In the interval between matter and mind, self-appeared timeless awareness is the great sinner. Enshrouded by the succession of adventitious circumstances and situations, one never has time to realize the meaning of the unborn. Seize hold of the firm bastion of the unborn nature, Richungpa. In the interlude between this life and the next, our soul is the great sinner. Deprived of a physical body, it seeks to associate with yet another, never having time to realize the meaning of the way of abiding of nature. Ascertain once and for all the way of abiding, Ritrungpa. In the deceptive city of the 6 classes of beings, thick are the obscurations of criminality and harmful actions, pursuing attachments and aversions one after the other. One never has time to realize the equality of all things. Do away with attachments and aversion, O Ritrungpa. From the expanse of the sky of what is not manifest, the fully enlightened Buddha, Shakyamuni, this big fat effing liar, went on and on and on about teachings that mislead you, leaving no time to realize the definitive meaning. Cast away these provisional splitting of hairs, O Ritrungpa. I'll explain that one, by the way. Pray from your heart to the teacher, tutelary deity and protector, as one. Take into taste the view, meditation and conduct, all into one. Gain familiarity with this life, the next, and the interlude, as all being one. These were the last of all of my instructions, the penultimate amongst all of my testaments. Other than that, there ain't nothing more. Take this into practice, my beloved son. Thus, having spoken, he vanished once again into the expanse of lucid light. So this, you might understand why it's not commonly published, because of course people would be shocked. What? Milarepa just says Shakyamuni is a big fat effing liar. It is actually, in the tradition of Mahamudra, the biggest compliment he is making to him. It means Shakyamuni went through all the time, all the hardship of going through the details of explaining things in more dualistic concepts, so that more people could have time to understand and practice gradually. But it's a lot of work, when in fact all that needs to be done is nothing. But that was his kindness. But what he's highlighting by that is that when you understand what it comes to, all the different approaches to spirituality, whatever they are just steps on a ladder to get to the 0 point. You leave what is irrelevant, what is secondary aside, and you just concentrate on what is most important. That was, of course, the meaning of that, but that's a very provocative statement. You can say now that Milarepa treats Shakyamuni as a big liar. In the biggest sense. So generally speaking, just to finish off with this presentation, because of course the topic, as you clearly saw, is first and foremost meditation. What is it? There is no way you could start to meditate without knowing why, who, what for. And there are a few basic notions that you cannot not have given yourself the time to think about before you start. Because as knives and forks in your pantry, with which you can just have a nice dinner or take and kill someone, meditation is a tool, and your intention, the purpose, and why you're doing and what you're doing, this only you can know. Doing the practice perfectly, as others will tell you, will not get you free at all. So, in brief, to briefly introduce the concept of meditation, and then further detail would require another context. Traditionally, there are 3 forms of wisdom. Ancient India, Tibetans kept the same thing. You find these principles everywhere. Wisdom is a huge subject, and any of these approaches can be a direct gateway, like maths, quantum physics, philosophy, spirituality, religion, atheism, art, martial arts, whatever resonates most to you personally and emotionally. So people are invited to take a more detailed look on whichever, but with a clear understanding this time of how everything nicely fits into one. This oneness is but maths and physics all along, but a living maths of an aware nature, an algorithm the equation of which amounts to the richness of being enjoying itself, or self-awareness, in the words of Garab Dorje, founder of the Dzogchen or Great Perfection tradition of our timeline, many centuries before Shakyamuni, of which Padmasambhava was a major and more well-known player. Then, after mature reflection on an individual behalf, you will naturally know what you want, how you want to go about it. It's a long, long road back to source, point of origin, in the end, or rather the beginning, which happens to be the timelessness. So the first form of wisdom is learning, informing oneself, reading, listening to experienced elders, anyone, getting intel. Tope Shirap in Tibetan. Then the second, Sampe Shirap. The second is reflection, thinking about all this by yourself, trying to put it all clearly in, picturing it in your own thoughts and understanding, detecting the bugs and screws lying around, and investigating every one of them, all the answers being right here all the time. But this is a whole process. And it's said traditionally in the sutras, which means conversations or discourses or conference with Q&A, that if you spend just 1 second thinking about something, making up your own mind, it's just as much as if you spent eons and eons listening to other people and doing something else. And likewise, in the same proportion, 1 instant of meditation, when and only when you know why, really, and what for, with what motivation, it will be as efficient as eons and eons of reflection and pondering things and contemplating. Which is why the best way to meditate is, of course, optimally. You're going to spend a lot of time doing it, so might as well optimize. If you really know what you're doing, then the practice will work fast, you will get experiences quickly, you will gain confidence, you will become more free, your emotions calm down, and then you gain more and more confidence because it really works. Most people, they're not really sure what they're doing, I feel. So this is the accelerated version of the entire process of evolution itself, which is why it's fundamental to take all the time you need. You have your own tempo. Every one of us is our own metronome, and we need to learn first and then think about it and digest it. It's a process of digestion. Then when you're sure what you want to do, it will be relatively easy. If not, then meditation will only concentrate and reaffirm the mechanism of samsara, and by thinking you're doing something great, you will actually be doing the exact opposite. You're causing your own demise without even knowing. Meditation is a very dangerous tool because you're dealing with vital energy and your consciousness, and the way we perceive the world is what is most precious to us. It's even more intimate than our genital parts, you know. So that is why it's even more than in medicine, and you can understand that. Every medicine has this indications, caution, you might have this or that secondary effect, beware. This, even more so, it's your soul that you're going to heal. So that's why it's a very responsible topic, and a few explanations need to be said, and usually they're not said in the West, where in the East you're more familiar with it. It's more naturally there, and in the culture it's there, but in the West not at all. So you slowly mature from the inside with indwelling certainty and ever-growing confidence for having checked things out directly, personally. This takes the time it takes. Everybody is different on the grand chronological scale of things. Then and only then can the third form of wisdom be meaningful and blossom out, wisdom of direct experience or practice of cultivation or meditation. So don't jump into meditation. First, we need to study as much as we can, because you would think doing something so simple wouldn't require that many words. Considering it's the entire process of evolution, it requires a certain number of things to be seen and discussed about. That's why thank you so much for doing the topics you are doing with consciousness shift, because it's precisely the topic, to simply have an open floor where we can envision this and have the opportunity to do so. So here you personally and directly taste what this non-conceptual wisdom or nature is about, in the silence of your own discriminating knowledge. It is forever a silent language, whence its universal description as being ineffable, unspeakable, indescribable, unthinkable, inconceivable, and so forth. The name of Allah cannot be pronounced, is indicating that. And this form of wisdom is the only one that sets you free. This is why instructions about meditation rely on the intention, why you are doing it, just why you are using your knives and forks and so forth. If you're doing it to get full freedom, the full potential that is simply there as we all intuit, your intention has to be very clearly set, because that is the energy that is going to create the possibility for the result. Your intention is a cause. The mechanism is causality, as long as we're not in the core. And wanting it that strong, with that certainty, that amount of love, because it's out of sheer love and nothing more, then you will be able to get there, and then meditation, even 5 little minutes, will be so powerful and so effective. So the rest entangles you still to the inertia of dualism as a latent tendency of the mind, as quantum mechanics demonstrates, doing so on even more subtle or deep levels. So that was for these little presentations I wanted to share today.
Oh yes, thank you very much, Ori'Ana. And I would advise our listeners really, this is a video that you need to see twice, because she has quoted from books, from the masters, and they are really words, very deep words of meaning and wisdom. And Ori'Ana, I confess, I must see this video a second time myself, really to digest all those words of wisdom, you know. It takes time. It's just like reading a book where you can, you know, go back to the pages and underlining it. Yeah. So you have touched on the rainbow body, the third eye, and then on meditation. And what I'll do now is to give you a little story that I've heard and which would summarize everything that's been taught here in a way. You know, these masters, one thing about them is they are so wise, they're full of wisdom. Sometimes it's really hard to get their message. So in this story, told to me I have several masters. So this man who had health problems heard of a hermit who lives up high up in the mountains. So he took all his energy to hike up the mountain for many, many days. And finally, he found the great master. So once he reached the master, he just told the master his health problems and so on, blah, 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 and asked the master to probably, you know, give him some secrets, like some herbs or something, you know. And Ori'Ana, you know what? The master said these words, rub your stomach. And that was it. And this guy was very perplexed. And he was disappointed because what words of wisdom are those, you know, rub your stomach. And that was the end of his conversation. The master didn't want to see him anymore. So he hiked for 3 days back to the ground level and he started thinking, all the time, all the effort I did was for nothing, you know. Then one day he sat down and said to himself, why don't I try to rub my stomach? After all, I spent 3 days hiking up, climbing, you know, it wasn't easy. So this man rubbed his stomach clockwise and he started to do it. And then he found his digestion was better. And because his digestion was better, his health got better. And the truth and the wisdom of the master, he then only realized. So sometimes people may not understand me when they ask me questions and so on. And finally, I will end by saying, rub your stomach. So thank you for a wonderful session. And as I mentioned before, a lot of words of wisdom has been spoken here. And we need to really go back and listen it and go deep into it and sort of understand the gist of it. Don't you agree, Ori'Ana?
Oh yes, time is space, and we need to open this up. When you can meditate in smaller pockets of time, your whole experience of space and time open up too, and you can access intelligent infinity. So
thank you so much, and it's wonderful to have you talking about all these deep subjects. And so well, I wish you all the best. And in the traditional way, I would always say, Oni to. And don't forget, rub your stomach.
thank you, Dr. Hall.
Bye. Wonderful session.